So I've now logged 10 plus plays of Final Girl Madness in the Dark from Van Ryder Games. If you watch board game media online, you know about it and you've probably played it already. It was a smash hit when it released in 2021, and it's still going strong with new movies featuring new Final Girl characters, new killers, and new locations. So, for quick note here for our newbies. Final Girl is a solitaire horror game that lets you step into the tennis shoes of a teen protagonist who is hip deep in one of horror cinema's biggest tropes. The terrified young girl who gets her shit together in the middle of a slaughter, makes a plan, finds some weapons, and fights back. Now, there's lots to do in this game, but the deciding condition is simple. You stop the killer or the killer stops you. Now, which killer? Depends on what horror franchise or classic you like. You can square off against just close enough not to get sued versions of the xenomorph from Aliens, the malicious entity from Poltergeist, Freddy, Jason, and lots of others. The newest one is based on 1982's The Thing, so there's no shortage of interesting places to die. So once you have the Final Girl core box for about $20, you can add movies for another $20 or so. Each one with its own VCR-style box, its own killer character, and its own map. And because each location and new killer are faithfully informed by what their movie versions did, each killer and map functions in an entirely different way. The monster aboard the space freighter based on Alien has 3 different growth stages with distinct stats and behavior for each stage. In the Maple Lane box, your Final Girl can only fight Dr. Fright, aka Freddy Krueger, when she's asleep. In the Poltergeist knockoff, you never face off against the antagonist at all. You've got to rush room to room getting clues that help you save the little girl and get the hell out of there. And once you own more than one movie, the game is designed so you can mix and match enemies and locations. Want to cut and paste the evil puppet master into a polar research station? Go for it. Fight an alien at a summer camp with the heroine from a folktale? That's on the menu. Want to play cat and mouse with mutants in a mid-tier sit-down restaurant? Just go to anywhere that's serving at 1 p.m. Sunday in the North Powers corridor of Colorado Springs. That expansion's free. You drew the 11% tip for a 10-top event. You're dead, Final Girl. But mix and match challenges are still in the middle horizon for me. Right now, my hands are plenty full with the Madness in the Dark module I chose, which gets its inspiration from the Silent Hill console video game franchise and its Asylum cum Abattoir setting. So what follows is a number of observations in 2 major buckets. My first few runs at the game, when I was still getting my head around how to run it and seeing how theme meshes with gameplay, and bucket 2, which reveals the thrill and disgust I experienced when I started realizing what it would take to effectively move this creation's many blood-soaked levers. Lastly, I'll leave you with some parting thoughts and a few recommendations. So, Chapter 1, the first few tries. First thing that hits me is this game is busy and it is slick. I was frankly astonished to see how much game popped out of these magnetic VCR-style game cases. Piles of little cards, meeples, location-specific items, and tokens that go with scenario-specific rules. First impressions? It felt like seeing recombinant genius, like when the Strokes broke in 2001. Mechanically, there's nothing wholly new here, but it's combined seamlessly and with great verve. This game just feels crazy smart right off the blocks. 2 things seem to reside comfortably side by side here. A tale of plucky empowerment starring you, the Final Girl, and the Tom and Jerry splatter mandate of the parent materials tropes. I laughed out loud when I was setting up for the first time and I found I had use of a hospital gurney. Now, if you want to use it as a mission of mercy, it can help you get extra helpless victims to the exit. But if you're in a pinch, you can use the gurney as a weapon and hurl it at the ratchet lady, who's the killer, with all the victims on it to do extra damage. But the only downside is the victims die. You decide. Other great touches. The pills and tablets. There are pills laying about in various rooms that you can snatch and gobble up. There's a pill effects card that shows what happens when you save up your pills and start munching combos. There's an item called a patient gown that you can get in one of the searchable locations. It has flavor text that says, "I hate myself. I haven't taken a single move yet, and I already feel like I'm getting my money's worth." And I also want to talk about, the pleasure point of where theme, mechanics, and emotional response from the player, all line up so well here. These gears all mesh early. As I set out with Veronica, who is one of the two final girls that come with the Madness in the Dark box. Now, when I hit the first trigger, which is a horror card that you have to draw at the end of most turns, Nurse Ratchet promptly lurched into a room and iked a victim. I placed the first ever yellow victim meeple in the dead space on my player board. There was a tightness in my throat. I already hated the Ratchet Lady. In subsequent turns, I find myself leaning over the victim meeples during the panic phase rolls and just yelling, "Run, motherfucker, run!" Associative emotions come intense and early here. During my first few games, I never threw one blow in anger or even wielded one item, before things collapsed on me. The realities of the management card action system set in on me too late. Let's talk about how you get things done here. Anything you do, from walking to pausing for a deep breath to attacking somebody with a bone saw that you found in a closet, that all requires horror check rolls. Miss your rolls? You can mitigate bad luck by burning unused action cards, but you'll soon see during the planning phase, when you buy new actions for the next part of your strategy, how screwed you are if you burnt your whole hand trying to get 2 errand-level actions done and you don't have the resources to do much more than shiver under a desk during your next turn while everything goes to hell. It's an interesting action management system that requires a lot of thinking, and it's pretty unforgiving. This is the only solo game I've played a lot outside of Space Hulk Death Angel that produces so much blood and disastrous losses so early. It has horror movie flavor, but I was mistaken thinking that this would play by a horror movie arc. Maybe a few introductory killings, some unveiling or minor scrapes while the tension builds and I gird myself for a showdown. This assumption got me killed a lot. After 2 failures, I was finally coming around to the idea that I had to mix offense and combat into my action planning from the very first turn. I was getting butchered in second plot beat events right after the opening credits. I'm also getting some pretty major rules wrong, but that's why we get reps in. I started to feel as if I was punching more controls on the dashboard instead of being buffeted along on a tide of bloody surprises. The dashboard of the game's many indicators was starting to feel like something I could use to affect an outcome instead of just being part of a symphony of fail. I started to last longer and be able to do more stuff, finding myself in use cases on the Asylum map where wrinkles in triggering, effects, and tracking made the game look a lot fussier than it did on its first 2 plays. For the first time, I figured out how to rescue victims. I even slowed down once enough to commit a search action and find a knife in a supply closet. I used the Asylum-specific Calm action to transform 2 of the Ratchet Lady's Maniac minions back into trembling and quasi-compliant mental patients. I saw how the come back from the dead twists work. Although the pacing of these plays sagged a lot at the end, I was alive and had some things I could achieve on some of these games, but the Ratchet Lady's lack of an upper health limit made her all but invulnerable as the Bloodlust track boosted her movement and health. There's lots of times I just folded up the game rather than grind out another couple turns of fruitless cat and mouse. So be warned, there is an investment involved in learning how to pilot your final girl. There's a deceptive amount of weight and detail hiding in those tidy VCR boxes. Now, thematically, you get ROI right up front, but there's a bill due unless you want to continue being a smear and a shock of hair on a grimy tile wall. While it's not as sprawling, I can't help but be reminded of another old game on my shelf, Arkham Horror. I think Final Girl does theme better than Arkham Horror. The source material's ethos in Final Girl feels fused into the gameplay at a molecular level. The action, sprawl, and general unkindness of the Arkham Horror 2nd Edition was its theme. The snippets of disembodied Lovecraftian flavor text at the location counters, they never really stuck. They offered horror, but it was really just a pulp adventure when it was in motion. Final Girl feels more integrated that way. So, I finally come to grips with the fact that while there are movie themes and beats, they're hitting your sensorium with stressors akin to watching several horror movies at once. Like Arkham Horror, there are 3 or 4 very major things that are going wrong all at once, and unspeakable enemies gather against largely outmatched characters. But in Arkham Horror, the inexorable gears don't advance at such overwhelming speed. You get ground into a fine pace slowly. Final Girl goes from 0 to fucked in 3 you're dead seconds. And like I said, a lot of my learning sessions in Final Girl, they sagged nastily after turn 4 or 5. I'd still be on the map with ostensible options, but by that point, the Ratchet Lady, my antagonist, was out of control. I had a couple bad die rolls that cost me turns I couldn't afford to lose, and I didn't want to just limp around the board. Back in episode 63, I reveled in the fact that the Morkborg RPG is called Frontier Scum, presented you with the plain proposition of dying hilariously in the strangest way possible in an awful place. You accept that to tell the story. Final Girl dangles a heroic story in front of you, but the product is dying hilariously in the strangest way possible in an awful place, at least in my first series of games. And like I said, there's not really necessarily a story first. It's a glitter bomb of viscera playing at 8x speed with not enough ways to remediate the hard knocks, it seems. By the 3rd or 4th play, the comedy of misfortune instead started to produce disgust. It's the 2nd turn. I just want to move 2 spaces away. I cleaned out my hand with bad rolls, and I'm about to lose my 3rd turn because the horror track is already out of control. All of a sudden, none of it felt fun or funny anymore. But I stuck with it and I learned some things. Chapter 2, Games 5 through 10. So by this stretch of games, after rebalancing my focus and refining my approach, this game's relentlessness, cruel comedy, I'm starting to deal with how the pressure comes from all directions at once. I follow Giant Brain Chris Farrell on Instagram, where he reviews tons of board games. I remember now what he was saying on Instagram about his experiences with this game. He said, I feel like the game is playing me. And that's one of the reasons he said he was putting it down after a few plays. And I get it. A day before seeing his post, I noted that even for the usual pressure cooker of a tough game with a grisly theme, I had never felt so pushed into a reactive mindset so forcefully. My 5th or 6th game was case in point. I couldn't get anywhere. Dice rolls plus bad events meant something I needed to do in 2 turns took 4. I was already screwed. By the 5th turn, the Ratchet Lady has a terrible head of steam. I got one clever move off and then I died. Even when I was, when I was able to balance my options, hopelessness started setting in early and often. A few bad rolls can derail you very badly and leave you rudderless, and the game's wild challenge machinery just speeds out of reach too quickly. But then, and this goes back to the way Final Girl's theme, mechanics, and strategy blend so well, I did something that movie watchers want every heroine to do. I snapped. Things started to go wrong early, again. So I made a beeline for a bone hammer sitting in a utility closet and spent every turn I could smashing it into Ratchet Lady's face, bleeding from deep cuts myself, banking all my plays on retaliatory and big strike abilities. As I forgot my usual self and, in the space beyond sense or even courage, flew at her with everything I had left, and I learned a lot about what the game wants me to do. She came back to life and killed me, as it happens in the movies. Oh well. Her endgame superpower eventually activated, and she started spawning waves of maniacs from her location, issuing toward me in a gibbering stream down a hall. Veronica was already exhausted. She had 2 victims with her, and she knew they weren't going to live long enough to see that exit sign. You could practically hear the sticky bone hammer fall with a lonely clank as Veronica realized that she was out of gas. But it was a good story, and a bright guidepost to reorient my approach to the game. Just apologies to Veronica and the nameless ranks of victims who suffered needlessly because I'm a slow learner. So, a couple of observations to leave you with. Um, while it's amazing to see how many distinct functions and pieces and flavor comes out of these magnetically bound boxes, I will say this is a lot of setup for a single playthrough. In my house, this only gets taken out for multiple plays. The first time I saw how the world inside these boxes laid out and got organized, I was amazed. The third play, it all started to feel too clever by half. Sometimes it feels like a pretty toy that's too much work to put back in its carrying case. That's a lot of packing, shuffling, and repacking. Which direction is this magnetic spine supposed to face again, and why isn't it flush? That's a lot of work for one go around. But the nice part is I suck at the game, so when I take it out once, it'll be there for an evening and an afternoon. As far as recommendations go, if you love the milieu, its tropes, have an appetite for punishment, and crave all the distinct flavors of punishment that'll come with each killer, you should get this. But I would not recommend this to anybody who doesn't have a pretty rich frame of reference for what unforgiving solo games are supposed to do. I pity the noob who sees this on a shelf, thinks, I love horror movies, and marches to the register with their debit card out. There's a wild level of detail and unmerciful challenge in those cute boxes. Concentrated variety and misfortune that will expand very quickly. Contents under pressure. Be advised. As for me, I've made friends with the game's proposition. This is going to see a lot of table time this summer. It's beckoning to me with the same force as Thunderbolt Apache Leader did over late winter. I love Thunderbolt Apache Leader, so something is working here. And if I earn my stripes and get proficient at taking the Ratchet Lady down, I'm thinking I might get the Intruders movie, which is based on the multiple psycho home invasion premise, or Thanksgiving, as it is known in the upper Midwest.